Marvel Comics is the most consistent publisher when it comes about producing and publishing hardcover collections and omnibuses. They've been doing it for years. They have brought to us great runs, great collections from the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Modern Age of comics. Great runs, phenomenal and iconic. However, even though they have brought so many good stories into the hardcover collections, there are plenty runs out there that still deserve to be published at some point. They deserve to have an omnibus. So in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to share with you 10 runs that I personally consider deserve to have an omnibus at some point. These are great stories that I would say lapse between the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. Runs that are historically important. They are critically acclaimed, and they have the involvement in some of the greatest minds of the industry. So, stay tuned. Number 1, Black Panther by Don McGregor. What can I say? It is one of the most historically important books in the library of Marvel, and definitely one that is very underappreciated because a lot of people do not know it. It consists of the stories that he created with Panther's Rage back in 1973 in Jungle Action, which is considered by many the first graphic novel of Marvel history and perhaps the first graphic novel of all times. But you also have the stories that he did with Panther's Quest back in 1989 and also Panther's Prey that was done in 1991. Some are the stories, a continuation of all of this run. He did fantastic. It definitely not only the writing is phenomenal, also the art. You have artists like Rick Buckler, Gil Kane, Billy Graham, Klaus Johnson that was doing the inks of the original Panther's Rage, but also you have Gene Colan doing the work in Panther's Quest, and you also have Dwayne Turner who did the work for Panther's Prey. It is an iconic run. It is fantastic. The best way to really know Black Panther, so it really deserves to have an omnibus. Number 2, Captain Marvel by Jim Starlin. Well, I can call this actually the Cosmic Adventures by Jim Starlin, because I'm going to include in this omnibus not only Captain Marvel, but I'm going to include some of the stories that were written on the Avengers, but also stories that were written for Adam Warlock. I can tell one thing, Jim Starlin by many is considered perhaps one of the fundaments, not only of the Marvel Universe as we know it now, but also of the MCU. His ideas, his concepts he introduced on those pages back in 1973 throughout the 70s had really influenced the way the comics have, evolved until modern times, but also the way the MCU has evolved. So you can see not only stories from Captain Marvel, you see stories from Iron Man number 55 where he introduced Thanos. You had Marvel feature number 12. You have Warlock 9 to 15. That's when he wrote Adam Warlock. You had Marvel 2-in-1 as Spider-Man versus the Thing. That's when they confronted Thanos. You got Avengers Annual 7, Strange Tales 178 to 181, Marvel graphic novel number 1, which many consider pretty much the first story that was actually considered a graphic novel for Marvel. That's the Death of Captain Marvel. And you also have the Life of Captain Marvel, which are reprints of some old stories with new covers. There is a lot of history. You can add so much into it. Like, again, you can call it Captain Marvel by Jim Starlin, but you can also call it the Cosmic Saga by Jim Starlin. These are the beginnings of it, and that's what really prompted and really gave way to what would be the Infinity Gauntlet, and then of course the Infinity War and the Infinite Crusade. All of that is because of what he created there. Prior to Starlin, you have many creators with Captain Marvel. You got people like Stan Lee and Gene Colan. You got Roy Thomas, Arnold Drake, Don Heck, Mike Frederick, Gil Kane, and among many others. And everyone, they give something to, in this case, Captain Marvel. We haven't even had an omnibus of that, or the origin story. However, it wasn't until Jim Starlin that took over that really he shaped the character. He introduced, again, Thanos, Eon, Magus, Drax the Destroyer, Moondragon, the Cosmic Cube, the Infinity Gems, all of that really has shaped the Marvel Universe. You can find these collections on pretty much on softcover. You can find the Captain Marvel and Warlock by Jim Starlin complete collections, and you can also find the Avengers versus Thanos softcover. But definitely, it would be nice to have it all included, just the same way Marvel has done with John Byrne on the Marvel Universe by John Byrne omnibuses. It would be nice if they can include that of the early work of Jim Starlin during that time with the Cosmic Saga. Number 3, The Incredible Hulk by Sal Buscema. When you think about the Hulk, you think about so many great renditions throughout the years. But if there's one that is more iconic than any other, it will be Buscema's, because it is just the perfect definition, the perfect representation of the character, the one that has influenced any other. Now, Sal was involved in the process of the Hulk for over 10 years, really a long time. The person that did it before him, Herb Trimble, did it for 7 years, and he's also considered very iconic, particularly his covers. But Sal really gave, in the interiors of the pages, it really gave so much life to the character. He worked with some of the best writers of in this case of the Hulk. You have Len Wein, Roger Stern, Bill Mantlo, and definitely it's very, I would say, iconic. And by today's standards, perhaps a bit cheesy, but definitely, nonetheless, it's still one of the greatest. Now, we have Peter David Hulk Omnibus coming very soon. But in my opinion, even though I like Peter David's work, I definitely consider that Sal Buscema should deserve a better place. Number 4, Avengers by Roger Stern. When you think about Roger Stern, you think about his iconic work with Spider-Man. I would say one of the most iconic writers for the character. However, you also have to think about the Avengers. For many, Roger is considered perhaps the second most definitive writer of the Avengers since Roy Thomas. He definitely cemented the character. He respected the characters, the origins of the characters, and he gave them the same stories that they definitely were good at. He was preceded by the iconic runs of Steve Englehart and Jim Shooter. Also David Michelinie, Bill Mantlo, Steve Grant, and others wrote in between. But when he took over, definitely he defined and he created some of the best stories, in my opinion, of that era in the early 80s. You have the art of Sal and John Buscema, Al Milgrom, Steve Ditko, Bob Hall, and John Byrne. He introduced Monica Rambeau, the new Captain Marvel. He also introduced Obrod, Tigra, and Namor and She-Hulk into the team. He created, so it split up the teams into the Avengers and the West Coast Avengers. He wrote the trial of Hank Pym, Under Siege, Absolute Vision, and of course he brought back Kang and time again. So definitely very iconic stories of the early 80s, and in my opinion, they deserve to have an omnibus. Number 5, Amazing Spider-Man by Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz. Now, in the 80s, of course, after Roger Stern finalized his work with Spider-Man, Tom DeFalco took over. And the art of during those early 80s years, you have Rick Leonardi, you have Steve Ditko, he did some work there, Sal Buscema, and he started co-plotting with Roger Stern on issue 251. He also, in this case, DeFalco wrote for Spectacular and Web of Spider-Man, among other books. Great run in between Roger Stern and Michelinie. So if you're going to consider in between, we already have the Roger Stern omnibus, and we already have, in this case, the Michelinie run. But definitely there's something that needs to be done in between. And if you have to consider, in that case would be DeFalco. This is the Black Suit Saga. You got the Silver Sable and Puma first appearances. Also, there was a lot of love triangles between Black Cat and MJ. So definitely it's a very important time in the history of Spider-Man. You got the New York underworld, you got the Kingpin, you got the Rose, the Hobgoblin. One thing that you can consider about Tom DeFalco is the fact that he went back to the roots of Spider-Man. He went back to that pretty much like a street level Spider-Man that actually was taken away a little bit earlier in earlier years. He went back to that. He definitely applied some of that. There were a lot of intricacies in the story. There's a lot of dilemmas that he's facing, and definitely the love triangle between Black Cat was one of the things that I really enjoy a lot. So and the Black Suit, I would say a big fan of it, but it also is a big part and introduces and really sets the stage for what later will become with Venom on the Michelinie run. So in my opinion, it is a must-have. Number 6, Iron Man by David Michelinie and Bob Layton, Volume 2. Now, I want to review Volume 1, and I consider the most iconic and the most important book of Iron Man history, one that you should have. When the guys left on issue 157, Dennis O'Neil took over as a writer on issue 158, and he continued on all the way to pretty much through onto issue 214. There were other writers in between as well, but in issue 215 on the Armor Wars, David Michelinie and Bob Layton came back again and started working again. They work all the way to issue 258. And it is also those stories are also considered important in the life of Iron Man, Tony Stark. They are iconic. The art is fantastic by Mark Bright. Of course, John Romita did the work on the volume 1, but also you saw the work of Jackson Guys, and Bob Layton also did some of the issues. Very iconic stories. The Armor Wars are extremely important to know to really understand Iron Man, and in my opinion, we deserve to have a volume 2 of these guys. They deserve it. They did a fantastic job. Number 7, The Punisher War Journal by Carl Potts and Jim Lee. What can I say? Most people, when they think about the Punisher, they think about Garth Ennis because it's the most modern writer, and we already have 2 omnibuses. Everybody recommends you read Garth Ennis, but I'm not the type of person that I will recommend Garth Ennis to you. I will go back to the beginnings, to the roots of the character. And of course, this is not the first run, because in 1986 we had the first 5-issue run with Steve Grant and Mike Zeck. That's their origins, and we don't have a hardcover for that either. And then in 1987 we start a new run with Mike Baron and Klaus Johnson, but also you got Will Potasio and Eric Larson at the beginning of their careers. Very important runs, beautiful art and all of that. But the most iconic, the one that people remember the most, is War Journal that started back in 1988. Carl Potts did the original 3 issues. He did the art, he wrote and did the art. But Jim Lee took over on issue 4. And this is the beginning. This is the start of Jim Lee. And the art is fantastic. It's phenomenal. It's beautiful. And they continue on all the way to issue, I would say, 24. And that's when Mike Baron and Mark Teixeira took over on the book. And then Chuck Dixon took as writer of the book on issue 38. However, the beginnings of this character are fantastic. At least, you know, you have to consider this. This is the early 80s. It's still gritty, but not as gritty as Ennis. But it's still gritty, and it's early stuff, and it's not, I would say, as dark, but definitely sets the stage and kind of knows the character. And of course, the art is so beautiful. You're drawn to the art, and we have the soft covers, but we need to have a hardcover of this collection. In my opinion, it is a must-have. He not only interacted with characters from the, his underworld, but also he interacted with Daredevil, Spider-Man, Black Widow, Wolverine, the Kingpin, and Doctor Doom. Number 8, Excalibur by Chris Claremont and Alan Davis. When I think about the late 80s and the early 90s, of all the teams that were created like the New Warriors, I've always think about Excalibur because it was a fun read. It was strange. There are a lot of weird tales happening there. You have the adventures of the Captain Britain, the defender of course of the UK. You got Kitty Pryde, Nightcrawler, Rachel Summers, and the shapeshifting Megan. And they go through very weird adventures, in all type of situations. And I really like it. It was fun. It was definitely a signature style of the time. And Chris Claremont has always been known for doing weird stuff. And definitely he let his weird go wild on this book. And I really like that. Paul Neary was the inker. Now, Claremont left on issue 34. Scott Lobdell took over as a writer until issue 42, when actually Alan Davis became also the writer of the book. So Alan Davis, he was pretty much juggling both jobs, doing the writing part, but also doing the art. And I love it. Definitely, there's fantastic, great stories, very weird stories, but I appreciate more now than I ever did. And we have the softcover collections, but it definitely would be nice to put them all together, as I did with the New Warriors, into a hardcover book. Number 9, Amazing Spider-Man by David Michelinie and Mark Bagley. Back in 1991, Bagley took over as an artist after the departure of Eric Larson. And for many, he is perhaps better than Larson, although I prefer Larson's art. But you cannot really downplay the influence of Bagley and how his art evolved over time and how it became better and better as time went along. Definitely, Spider-Man has a lot, modern Spider-Man has a lot to thank the art of Bagley. A lot of the modern artists have followed pretty much the example, have followed his style, and they apply it. Of course, in the early 2000s, he was part of the Ultimate Spider-Man for a long time. He was involved in the process with it. So if there's an artist that knows Spider-Man, at least from the perspective of knowing the art, of course, is Bagley. He, of course, took on issue 351, he took over. He stayed there until 1996, until pretty much the end of the book. And during his tenure, you saw the Carnage saga, you saw the crossovers with the New Warriors and the Punisher. Some of these issues that he was part of, they've been included in other omnibuses like SpiderMan versus Venom. You saw the Maximum Carnage there, but you also have the complete Clone Saga omnibus collections, and those are okay. But the initial work of, in this case, Bagley has not been contained in an omnibus that is comprehensive. We already have the McFarlane, we already have the Larson. It is a must to have a Bagley collection. And of course, after Michelini left on issue 388, DeMatteis actually took over as the writer, and also DeMatteis is a fantastic writer of Spider-Man. But I would say that Mark Bagley deserves to have an omnibus of his initial work with Spider-Man. Number 10, and this is the last on the list, Spider-Man 2099 by Peter David and Rick Leonardi. What can I say? I love Spider-Man. I think I included a lot of Spider-Man stories here, and there's plenty to share. Of course, this is not, you would say that this is not technically a Peter Parker story. It is not a Peter Parker story. It is a Spider-Man story. Of course, in the future, Spider-Man meets Cyberpunk. But I love the work that was put into it. Of course, the story of Miguel O'Hara, beautiful stories, beautiful art. Rick Leonardi definitely did a fantastic job on the run, and I love it. Peter David, it is definitely, I would say nowadays we can get to see a lot of appreciation for Peter David work. You're getting to see the in this case the Hulk by Peter David omnibus that is coming soon, and it seems that people are talking more about Peter David, that people really are seeing his influence in comics, at least in the 90s. And Spider-Man 2099 definitely also serves that. It really showcases Peter David as a great writer, but also it's one of those iconic runs of the 90s, and one that in my opinion deserves to be put all together into an omnibus. What can I say? Creating this story, this list was very, very fun, but also was really, really hard, because there are so many iconic runs in the lengthy 80-year history of Marvel that it's hard to really bypass some for the benefit of others. But, I went through this history of Marvel, and I chose those runs that to me are important because they have really defined characters, and they are very important to me as a comic book reader growing up, but also until this day I still read, I still enjoy, and they deserve to have an omnibus. These are my top 10, of course. You may have a different list, so I invite you to share your list on the comments below. Of course, right now Marvel is concentrating a lot on doing a lot of reprints, which I'm not against, because I do believe that we need to have some of those runs reprinted again, some of those omnibuses that sold out pretty quick, and they deserve a newer audience. But I do believe that these runs also, the ones that I share in this list, they deserve to have a spotlight at some point, because we have to preserve the history and the iconic runs of throughout those years, of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and so on. But what is your opinion? I would like to hear it. Please share it again down below. And thanks for watching. God bless, my friends, and I'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.